Hello, and welcome to what will presumably be episode 1 of my podcast, because I just sort of looked around at the media landscape and thought, what the world is missing is more podcasts. The idea here is I have this, I have these plans for the kind of content I want to be making, and I sort of was had these sort of big plans to do bigger long form video essay stuff, which is still what I want to do and still what I'm leading up to. Stay tuned within the next 3 to 7 business years. But in the meantime, I also kind of want to do just this kind of quick review stuff and just, here's what I've been watching, here's what I'm thinking about, here's some recommendations, and just if you care to engage with it. And it's the kind of content that you sort of engage with when you're trying not to work while at work or cooking or maybe even, driving or just general disassociation. And so I did 3 of these as video reviews where it had the visual aspect with me in the room with the rim lights and the amount of effort it takes for something that, again, people don't really, the visual aspect of a video like that is adding nothing, and it takes a lot more in terms of editing and worrying about my face and the lighting. And then the editing, the files are bigger to edit, and then my potato laptop can't do that. Plus, they were also not 5 minutes, but 20 minutes, which is about 15 minutes longer than they should be. So yeah, this podcast is more or less replacing that to any who want to just listen to me waffles about films on a cloudy day in High Pittington, Comadarin, DH6 1AS. Hoping to still at some point get something visual, just as a placeholder for the video. It could be stills from the film, but I was thinking more, I could do if any of the patrons know any cartoonists who could draw a very quick, cute doodle of me holding a microphone, sure. That, or maybe I'll just play some Subway Surfer. Why not? 10 degrees outside, and outside my window, there's, I guess it's a bee that is kind of just frozen to death. Should I put a picture of the bee here? Is this some good visual content? Let me just snap a photo of this guy. Realized I've kind of talked about how I take too long to do these, and I'm seeing my timer's already at 5 minutes, and I've said nothing. So we're going to talk about, today I'm going to do a Spooktober breakdown, because that just seems like a reasonable cutoff point to start at. I'm going to be putting one out, I guess, every week for every week of Spooktober. So this is week 1, and we're leading with The Substance. So The Substance, new film that just came out. This is one of the films I was most excited for in all of this year. I think 2024 has had quite a good docket of films so far. I don't think it's as strong as 2023, but it's pretty strong. I also think a lot of the big films of this year came out uncharacteristically early. There tends to be a thing where the studios spam all the good films in November so they can bait awards. This year they seem to be a bit more spread out, which is cool, I guess. But all in all, I don't think it's as strong a year as last year, but I still think it's a pretty good year. The Substance was one I was really, really, really hyped for, really excited for. Maybe top 3 most hype of the year. I don't know, something like that. From Coralie Farge. I haven't seen any of her other films. I'm interested in seeing. She has a feature called Revenge from 2017, which I will check out sometime in the next 12 years, and a short film called Reality Plus, which I think is on Mubi, so maybe I'll watch that. But this definitely feels like her breakout film. And just to explain my hype over this film, I think it's just the kind of film that just seemed up my alley. It was okay, we have something weird, love some good horror, body horror, kind of allegorical style, social commentary elements, general effed upness, what's not to like. And on the back of that, the reception it seemed to get upon release was really strong. People who had already seen it or seen it at festivals, and the film influencers, I guess you'd call them, critics, whatever I follow online, largely seem to be really, really keen on it. Even the harsher ones seem to be really keen on it. Seeing a lot of 4.5s out of 5 on Letterboxd. So I thought, okay, I was hyped. Now I'm double hyped. And I think this film is super worth watching, and so I definitely recommend you do. And if you are somewhere where it will still be showing in cinemas by the time I put this video out, which is unlikely because I think Eden already has its last like 3 showings, so I don't know. To anyone clip out of time, I checked this, I'm wrong. It's still showing at Eden, and it's still showing in a lot of places in the UK as well, if anyone from the UK is listening. So yeah, go check it out in a cinema. It's definitely the kind of film that I went to watch, and I went to watch it in the cinema, and it's definitely better if you're in a full cinema, packed cinema. A film festival would have been great for it. I went to the Edinburgh Film Festival. It showed there. I was not there when it was showing. I thought it already sold out by the time I looked for tickets anyway. But definitely that kind of setting. If not a packed cinema, honestly, I'd recommend like getting like friends and if you can get like a group of friends, 5, 6, whatever, over and have a little movie night. Get drunk before or something else. For that purpose, yeah, I'd definitely recommend it there. I think it will definitely do well. It's definitely better as a group film because I think it's just a kind of like outrageous, slasher, violent, body horror, but also played to be funny kind of film that just really suits a crowd. And even judging by some reviews I've read, that seems to be a reaction. I think a crowd can like really build up a film. I do really think, I'm just here waffling for you. I think there are films that are very like, like most people, purists will tell you that like you should see everything in the cinema, and I generally agree with that. But I think there are some films that are really like better watched alone, or that hit harder when watched alone. Sometimes even like on crappier technology than a beautiful cinema screen. Some things are great to watch with headphones and a laptop, as I often remark, and as I will cover, because I think I want to do an episode on last year's Spooktober. I don't know how well I remember the films I watched, but probably quite well. And there were some like Rec or Pulse that like I watched like that, and it really lends itself to it. Anyway, predictably steering off topic. So this is definitely better as a crowd film. It's a kind of film where like if people in the crowd are laughing, you will laugh, and that will help. And if not, you kind of like to yourself, there's a lot of and kind of smiling and chuckling, but like you're not gonna belly laugh by yourself, or if you're like 2 people, maybe you do. If you're built like that, fair enough. Mighty long walk for a very short glass of water. I was ever so slightly disappointed by this. Full card, I've given this a 7 out of 10, and I feel very confident with my 7. Not that numbers matter. And the reason is I enjoyed it. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was clever. I thought it was very funny. I thought it was a lot of fun. I thought there was a lot of really, really great filmmaking. Lots of choices, which, I love choices. It's kind of very maximal, not in terms of like, don't think like maximal in terms of like aesthetic or set design, maximal in terms of filmmaking. It's very punchy is the word I keep landing on. A lot of like rush zooms, rush pans into like a wide angle lens. Lots of extreme close-ups on bold lettering and very loud. My God, this is a loud film. This is a very squelchy film. One of the squelchiest films I've ever seen. There's lots of squelching going on, and loud. The sound design is really punchy and really loud, and it's very consistent throughout. Like it's got a very realized and actualized, confident and aggressive style, aesthetic, and visual language, which I appreciate a lot. I was hoping for a bit more out of it conceptually. I guess I wanted the film to be smarter than it was. How pretentious, I know. So let's get into it. So, basic premise, Elizabeth Sparkle, played by Demi Moore, who is, for those who don't know, a Hollywood starlet of the 90s, who is now kind of, she's now in real life, the actress is 61 or 2, something like that, and kind of, obviously had that thing happen where, every big actress in Hollywood slowly gets less and less relevant after they turn 30. And this film is about a character who that's happening to, so harsh, rude casting, very on the nose. Obviously she agreed to it, and in some ways is the perfect kind of actress to bring it to life, and for what it's worth, I think she's really, really good. I think she does a great job with it. Very believable in the role, but again, it's kind of like, yeah, you are playing a you kind of character. So the character's name is Elizabeth Sparkle. Elizabeth Sparkle, who is she? She is a former Academy Award winning actress of some point, and she hosts this aerobics TV show, kind of like very Jane Fonda. She's let go from the show on her 50th birthday because, 50 is too old, as she's told by her boss, the disgusting producer, Harvey, played by Dennis Quaid, who eats shrimp in a really gross way and is kind of loud. And, he's called Harvey, and it's kind of like, oh, like Weinstein. This film isn't subtle ever, and that's totally fine. It leans into it. It's kind of like, it reminded me a lot of Triangle of Sadness, which, it's not a horror, it's not a body horror, that film, but it is like this kind of extremely over the top, on the nose, played for laughs satire that revels in how unsubtle it is, and that, subtlety is not like the highest prize in film, and these films aren't trying to be that. I love Triangle of Sadness, and I like this film a lot. So just noting that's not a critique, just an observation of what it is. And anyway, she starts kind of, it's a bit of a, what I would like to call like Man in the Hole style films. You meet a guy and like, hey, look at this guy, his life sucks. We're getting a woman in a hole film. This is a bit like, letterbox review, those like one-line letterbox reviews. I'm sure we'll call this like, oh, it's Joker for women. Like, it's that kind of thing. So yeah, she's a has-been, she's let go. And then, she's driving home from the studio. She's distracted by a poster with her face that's being torn down, gets into a car accident, da-da-da. So anyway, we get a little intro into her sucky, sad life and lonely. And that's one thing I think I did appreciate a lot about this film from a more thematic, conceptual side is how it emphasizes, in a more quiet way than everything else it's emphasizing, it sort of quietly shows you that loneliness. Pin in that, we'll get back to it later. And at the hospital, a nurse gives her a flash drive promoting the substance. And so this is a serum that promises to create a younger, more beautiful, more perfect version of you. And, after some deliberation, she does the whole back and forth. Should I not? She orders it. She injects it into her with this massive needle. And what happened next is a big spoiler. If you've seen the poster where it's just her on the bathroom floor with, I guess you'd say her back sort of sewed shut, that can give you an indication what's going to happen. But spoilers, they weren't kidding about the whole younger you. The younger you literally emerges from her back. There are yelling children outside. So this younger version of herself, played by Margaret Qualley, who is this beautiful, sexy, perfect version of her, and she takes on the name Sue, and she starts to live the life Elizabeth used to have and wish she still had. And then you have, some gimmicks. Please don't watch this and get caught up on like, oh, but this is so unrealistic. It's like, yeah, but you're missing the point entirely. Who cares? But the film covers some basic rules of this arrangement. The younger form, Sue, called the other self, and the older form, which is Elizabeth, which is referred to as the Matrix, they switch every 7 days, and this is a hard rule. They can't violate that rule of 7 days. And the younger form must stabilize herself daily by extracting some serum from the spine of the unconscious Matrix, which is the Demi Moore character, right? So that's kind of the basic plot and premise. And from there, shenanigans ensue. Sue gets caught in the revelry of youth and being hot shit and doesn't respect the balance, as Elizabeth will say, and by doing that she makes Elizabeth age more rapidly, and so Elizabeth gets spiteful and drinks and binge eats and makes a mess of their shared apartment. Oh no. And so there's the kind of back and forth where, it's one of the big things, the substance, I guess, people, I don't know, dark web drug peddlers tell you is remember that you are one, but like the film is about the two, the younger self and the older self, like beefing with each other basically. And I'm not going to talk about the whole plot, but so what did I think about this film conceptually? So it's a film that's very clearly indebted and proud of it to its influences. Clearly Miss Fage, I don't know how to say that name, hope I'm doing it okay. There's a lot of nods to, there's a nod to pretty clearly to David Lynch, a shot that's pretty clearly a reference to Blue Velvet, which I haven't actually seen, but I'm aware of the shot. There's nods to Stanley Kubrick, especially when Elizabeth first, it's kind of like almost like a Stargate sequence from 2001 kind of thing going on. The film, the director, it reminds me, and the obvious reference here is Cronenberg, who's kind of master of this kind of squelchy body horror where your body just takes on these weird shapes and gross, moist appendages kind of spawn out of you and all that kind of stuff. Very Videodrome-y, Crimes of the Future-y type stuff. I suppose it also reminds me of a contemporary filmmaker, Julia Ducarneau. She also a French woman filmmaker who works in body horror. She made Raw, which is fantastic, and Titan, which is fantastic. Both better films than this, I would say. Not that that's the point. So, again, as I mentioned, style is great and very realized and very much like a perfect complement of, I guess you'd say, the text. It's very aggressive and very confident, but it knows when to be kind of glossy, and it kind of leans into this kind of surreal almost feeling, but also knows how to be scary. I also think I'm really impressed, and this is something that you find both in the screenplay, but really impressed with how it's shown in the filmmaking itself, in the cinematography, in the visual language, is just the loneliness of it, which, I mean, also starts, like Elizabeth, Demi Moore's character doesn't have friends, apparently. She meets an old peer from high school, from the 10th grade, who asks her out, and she actually considers taking him up on it. And I think that's just like, well, that's a very lonely thing to do for a super famous, successful person, isn't it? Just emphasizing the isolating quality of aging. Actually quite sad in a way, and definitely a very pitiable character in that way, although also a kind of detestable character who seems very, obviously self-centered and can't handle no longer being the center of attention. Thematically, we're obviously talking about the disposability of aging women, but especially in the entertainment industry, but also the trap of kind of endlessly pursuing youth, and she injects herself to stay young and beautiful. Suppose we're talking about Botox a little bit there, and facelifts and cosmetic surgery and that kind of thing. And sort of juxtaposing those 2 points of like, is it a problem in the world, in the industry? Is it a matter of the self? Is it somewhere in between? It's kind of like, she cares about the wrong things, but can you blame her? And somewhere in there, I guess it's a bit about, identity and self-acceptance. I feel like this film has a very... it had potential. It's a really great film, which had potential to be a really, really great film. I think it has a very exciting premise that I think they deliver on well early on, and it evokes a lot of ideas. And there's a bunch of films, I could think of one off the top of my head right now, to be honest, but there are films that kind of, I guess there's a bunch of films that fall in this category where like, okay, it's very interesting at the start, but then like you don't explore it in a particularly interesting way. It's sort of like, this is the premise, and then shenanigans ensue from this premise. And that's all well and good and can make for a great fun film, but not a really great film that finds ways to turn that premise, mine it for greater complexity and greater insights into the themes and the characters, the different angles and faces within it. I think it ends up just spinning its wheel a bit. I think the end is very wheel spinning, where it's this like 20-minute, kind of victory lap, enjoying its own absurdity and ridiculousness, which is fun. I think it's probably a bit that, like, look, if you like the movie, you'll probably love that bit. I kind of found it a little bit like played out and indulgent at that point. Very clear allusions to Carrie there, not to spoil anything, although that probably is enough to spoil some things. I suppose one rebuttal to my whinging about maybe, it's not the most original idea, and they don't, they have a concept, but they don't like mine it for as many insights as I would have liked. Some people would say, well, maybe it's not what the film is saying, but how the film is saying it, and that's kind of the idea with film as an art. Anyway, it's about how you say it, and like, I don't know, I disagree. I definitely agree that how the film says something is what matters, because every point the film is trying to get across, there aren't that many important points to get across. Many of them could be seen as anywhere from, unoriginal to trite. So in and of itself, that's not like, something that this film does that like many films I would give a 10 to haven't done. My point is more so that it still matters what you're saying, and I find myself a little unsatisfied there. I find, I mentioned how it's unsubtle, and, unsubtlety is not a problem in itself. Triangle of Sadness, again, very unsubtle satire, which I like a lot. But I think the dialogue in a film like that is a bit more clever. I thought the dialogue in this film at points was a little unrefined and a little... It's not about it being on the nose. A little, like, the word I'm finding is undexterous, which doesn't really explain very much. There's a bit where a character is just repeatedly being called a freak. And I was just kind of like, oh, there's other adjectives you could try there without being so, repetitive, a bit repetitive and cliched. I am doing that kind of thing where like I watch a really good film that like got a lot of rave reviews and I don't agree with the degree of rave. And so it ends up sounding very critical. And I think that's a bit unfair because I do think it is a great movie that's worth watching. And that I really recommend because I think it's a lot of fun in any case. And I think some people, lots of people clearly are. I think some people were really in love with this. It kind of walks the line between being a bit of an art house film and a bit of a horror schlocky film. And I'm pretentious, so I would have preferred it lead into some of those art house instincts a little bit more and those schlocky instincts a little bit less. It kind of makes me think of how like there's certain films that I've seen, like horror films that get a lot of hype as being really great, and it's like, something like X. I mean, I think it's a lot better than X, to be fair, much more interesting film than X, but it's kind of like, I've heard a certain amount of like hype around, or like Long Legs, similarly, where I watch and it's like, look, I think it's a good film that does a lot well, and I appreciate it, but like this is still schlocky horror, and that's not like, I don't think horror has to be schlocky at all. I think horror films have as much claim to be the best films around as any other. There's just a lot of schlockiness. Side note, there's also nothing wrong with schlock. And even, again, we're talking relatively good films. I think Long Legs is a decent film, and I see why a lot of people liked it. I think Long Legs, again, was another film where I kind of felt like I was really intrigued, and then you just didn't go anywhere at all. That interested me in terms of exploration. It just felt like things playing out. And yeah, I think it's doing well in some relative sense, kind of riding the wave of like enjoying WTF cinema in the post A24 world, and that's great. And I hope Coralie makes more films, because I think, again, in terms of the aesthetic, in terms of the editing, I think the editing was fantastic. And she also edited this film, along with, I'm just reading, Valentine Ferrand and Jérôme Eltavé. What I do really appreciate about this film is how the pieces fit together. It's aesthetic, it's editing, but then it's themes, and the writing, and the performances, and the color palette, and of course the sound design. It's all very cohesive, making for one total piece. And it does what a lot of great films do, which is, sometimes people tend to think in this kind of binary of you have story and you have aesthetic, you have ideas and you have aesthetic. And the best films know that the aesthetic is the story, it is the ideas, it is the way to present the ideas through an aesthetic. I think in terms of my general assessment of a film, my criterion of how highly do I rate what it's trying to be, and how effective is it at being what it's trying to be? I think it is wholly effective at being what it's trying to be. I think the execution on this film, very, very strong in terms of what it's trying to be. Again, I rate it quite well. I just, I felt like it needed a bit more, a few more conceptual terms of this explore and mine that idea a little bit more and a little bit less repetitive in what it's trying to say. Next film I watched for Spooktober was a film called Threads. I had a weird experience with this film where like I was looking up what I want to watch for Spooktober, and I looked at the list of films I had and I wasn't totally satisfied, and then I just did some random like searching and exploring for something scary, and I came across this, and then I looked it up on Letterboxd, and I saw, if you look up this film on Letterboxd, there's an image, you know, the sort of banner image that they give, not the poster, but the banner image when you actually go into the film. And I found a banner image of the policeman, well, it's actually a traffic warden with like gauze on his face. I found that image super compelling. Had a very brief general idea that it was about nuclear holocaust, and I decided, okay, I'll watch this. I don't know, I just became kind of instantly intrigued based off very minimal vibes. And then like a YouTuber I watched put out a video, which I haven't watched yet, and in the thumbnail was that like traffic warden, was that image of the traffic warden with the gauze, and I was kind of like, this is strange coincidence, kind of thing that makes me feel like, you know, being controlled in some weird way, or my phone's just listening way too much. I don't know. So this is a film that it's directed by a director called Mick Jackson, but it's written and credited as being by. So the main force that gets credit here is a writer called Barry Hines, a very well-regarded novelist, screenwriter, playwright, and apparently amateur footballer. He generally works in social realism, generally located in the north of England. We're talking working class stories where political and economic struggles leak into their everyday personal lives. He's collaborated before with Ken Loach, who's one of the main figures in social realism in film, especially in England, known for films such as I, Daniel Blake. So this is a film that seeks to give the most realistic and matter-of-fact kind of presentation and life to the hypothetical, what if the United Kingdom got nuked? Specifically, what if Sheffield got nuked? I'm sure when people were thinking of nuclear annihilation in the 60s, 70s, and 80s during the Cold War, I think people were most interested in Sheffield specifically. This film came out in 1984, so we're talking about a time that's still very much in the kind of Cold War fever, and it's the kind of film you can watch now and appreciate the terror, but I feel like if you watched this when it came out, I have to imagine that must have been like really jarring. In the beginning of a film, it's kind of a typical kitchen sink drama. Kitchen sink dramas, generally we're talking about working class English stories about kind of angry, dejected men a lot of the time. Basically what I'm trying to say is it's kind of like almost something you'd expect to see like on, you know, daytime television drama, slice of life, you know, Jenny has big dreams of moving to the city, which her parents don't understand, and then she becomes pregnant by the simple boy, you know, it's that kind of thing. So like you have the two prospective parents, Ruth and Jimmy, they're in a, you know, they're overlooking the city, which we know will be destroyed soon, sitting in a car and just chatting, and she says she's pregnant. Jimmy goes home to tell his parents, Ruth goes home to tell her parents, and Jimmy says they have plans to get married and move in together. I don't know how old they're supposed to be, but you know, it's young, very much young adults, very much 20-odd, somewhere there, and their families react in different ways, and you can generally get the vibe that, you know, they have very different familial backgrounds, very different class backgrounds. And so, ostensibly, even though I knew what the film was going in, I know the coin is going to drop, and I know what coin is dropping, and that coin is a bomb of nuclear proportions, not a coin, spoilers. But even I was kind of like, I guess, caught off guard and kind of compelled by like, oh, we're starting with just like, it's a drama film. It's just like a kind of soap opera kind of, you know, people drama. And this is one of the many excellent choices I think the film makes. It obviously grounds you in the real lives of people and tries to attach you to real life characters, but also I think it just sells again the realism more to kind of show you in as much as it's, okay, it's very easy to see this is about the destruction, but it's not. It's about like what happens to people's lives and what's going on in their lives. So while this argument is playing out between Jimmy and his parents at the dinner table, right, and his younger brothers making kind of glib comments, and his younger sister is doing the same thing off to the side, making the situation worse, you can hear in the background of all this, whispered through the television screens, and in the opening half an hour of the film, it's all over the place. You'll get radio updates, and it starts very quiet and slowly gets louder and louder. You just hear about the tensions rising between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is invading Iran, which is responding to an American-backed coup. The typical kind of geopolitical nonsense the powers that be tend to get up to, and these tensions are rising, and as the film, goes on in this first 30 to 45 minutes, it slowly seems to be heading towards war. And again, even though I know how this film, I went in kind of, I went in knowing that the bomb drops, but our expectation from watching films is that when you have this kind of thing, we have this sort of, drama in the foreground, and then in the background you're hearing these things are kind of like bigger geopolitical events, or like often you'll hear to be a drama between husband and wife, and then in the background you're hearing about riots in Birmingham or some crap. You get what I mean, like that kind of thing. Banshees of Inisherin, for example, it's about the beef between these two no longer friends, but in the background there's the Irish Civil War playing out, and occasionally the bombs drop, occasionally the characters kind of acknowledge it or look at it, but it's very much something in the background. And there's supposed to be this kind of metaphorical or allegorical kind of line being drawn between the beef between Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson's character, Podrick and Colm, and the beef between Ireland and the other part of Ireland. And you kind of expect this to stay in the background. And the characters in Threads also seem to be, I guess, laboring under this illusion. Everyone reacts slightly differently to the news, but many are happy to just kind of change the channel and get back to their pint, uttering something like, what could we do about it anyway? There's a scene where Jimmy and his friend are at the bar, and he says verbatim that, basically, what could we do about it anyway? I just want to be pissed when it happens. And it's a statement that obviously, it's a kind of a truism, it's plainly true on its face, but it also suggests a kind of like very naive dismissiveness that we're all kind of guilty of, which is like something about the nuclear annihilation just doesn't seem real. And this, I think, really, this film, and obviously, don't listen to my words to understand it, watch the film to get what I mean, but it really captures that way that we are so dismissive about things going on the news and disasters and travesties the world over and strife, that we just kind of like, we see and we acknowledge, and maybe we'll talk about it for a bit, but we get fatigued or bored, or just don't really feel like we have much to say, and we feel powerless, and that's, not unfair. But the way that, there's a kind of element of kicking the can down the road and this kind of dismissiveness that this film challenges head on. Because in this film, the nuclear annihilation is very real. It's all too real. Slowly, this conflict will force its way into the foreground until inevitably that coin does drop. And when it does, it is so harrowing. I can't, it reminded me a lot of Come and See. It's definitely in the category of film with that, which is pretty much, the highest honor you can bestow upon a film, I guess, because Come and See is, I was going to say beloved. That's a weird thing to call that film, but, obviously acclaimed and appreciated as maybe the darkest, bleakest film ever. It's up there, that's obviously based on horrifying real events. And this film isn't based on real events, but it feels so real. And one thing I thought that I found was an interesting thing to think, an interesting insight of my own, is that one way this film differs a lot from Come and See is in its commitment to realism. It abandons drama. Come and See follows the same main character, and it's still very cinematic film. It's kind of beautiful in a weird, horrifying way. It's got a very poetic tone in moments, and the way it uses the medium is still very cinematic in a way that Threads isn't. Fred's presents itself almost as a documentary. At times there's a narrator, but there's also this text that rolls its way across the screen with this very cold and harsh typewriter sound that's kind of just presenting details, and it's presenting details like, it will just tell you, the Soviet Union has invaded Iran, and then it will tell you, Sheffield, major centers of industry, chemicals, steelwork. Then it will inform you of the major targets. Then it will tell you 2,100 megatons dropped on the UK, and just kind of give you this kind of like this very dry, matter-of-fact presentation of things that just really adds to the kind of coldness of it. And as much as it feels like it might be telling you too much that could kind of break your immersion in the realism, I think it really just contributes to the overall vibe and atmosphere that this film is going for. So many disaster films, something like San Andreas, is this big budget schlock crap that's interested in the spectacle. And I personally, I actually really have an intrigue in the spectacle of destruction and of big things. I occasionally will waste 2 hours of my life on the tornado subreddit, and just even atom bomb tests and stuff like that. I find that stuff very interesting. I find huge things very interesting. I find big destruction, megalophobia, all that stuff very interesting. So you'd think I'm someone who would appreciate the spectacle. It's just usually dumb, and then The Rock says something stupid and it's dumb. Or it's like 2012. And that's not to say you can't make disaster films that make a lot of the spectacle. It's just that no one talented is doing that. If I would, I would very happily and quite excitedly pay to watch. I would be pretty super hype for a Gareth Edwards destruction film. And he's actually made a Godzilla film, which I should really watch, because that basically is a Gareth Edwards destruction film. Anyway, this film was made on a budget of $400K, produced for television. So it doesn't really have the budget to do that anyway, but it also has no interest in being spectacle. It does present elements, I guess, you see a big mushroom cloud, that's what you're after. But again, it's focused entirely on realism. This is real hard-boiled, full-on, extreme hyper-realism. And it makes it so incredibly bleak. It's bleak in a way that is only possible for either films from the UK or Eastern Europe have a special kind of bleakness that I don't see, that I haven't seen anyway, in films from anywhere else. Make of that what you will. And also B, obviously a disaster film. Catastrophe films and war films, right? There is such a great appreciation of the details, both in the script and in the direction. In the screenplay, we talking about the screenplay, you see this event, generally it plays out and you follow a few, golly shocks, ordinary folk, right? And this film definitely has that, you have the prospective parents, the couple at the beginning, one of whom works the log yard. I couldn't even really make that out, but anyway, some kind of manual labor job, right? Makes me sound very in touch with the working class there. But also you get an insight into the kind of government position where you have this, elected councillor who's doing kind of damage control, and he goes into this underground bunker with a bunch of other government officials. And so you see their perspective of them trying to okay, we have to close these roads, we need to distribute these resources, we need to get a handle of what kind of communications we're going to have. And then they get the warning for when the bomb drops, and you see them kind of one of them's just screaming, I need to have over the radio, whatever, that I need the casualty number straight away. After the catastrophe, they're trying to set their office back in order, and there's debris and dust, and one of them died, but the rest of them are just carrying on trying in whatever way they can to get things up and running again. They have to understand the casualties, the damage. They then have to start making all these really difficult choices about, okay, we have limited resources, who's going to get them? 1,000 calories if you work, 500 if you can't work. And very tough, brutal, and dehumanizing choices, but very interesting to see that perspective, where in a lot of disaster films you kind of don't. They're kind of Big Brother is invisible or just missing, or the government just, or something the government collapsed. You see a lot of dystopia, the government collapsed, and you don't really see the the ins and outs of it, and this gives you a little glimpse into that. And again, like a way that this feels very realistic, no stone unturned. It feels like they definitely did their research basically into like what would literally happen, what were the projections, what were the protocols, because all this stuff obviously is information that is like was available. There was a lot of government research on like what would the human cost of life be? What would be the effects of nuclear fallout? How many people would die? How would we allocate resources? How would we manage the roads and all this kind of thing? But what this film also emphasizes is that would all be for naught. The big line in this film, the big message, I guess, takeaway is you cannot win a nuclear war. And that's just the point of this film, without, again, I'm getting into pretty heavy spoiler territory, but the film also maps out, a month after, 2 months after, years later, and you're again almost kind of expecting an uptick of some kind. You're expecting a point where, okay, but now things will get better, life rolls on, and we rebuild, and you never get that. It's just constant bleakness right up until the last shot, which I think the final shot really kind of emphasizes that the terror of it all will never end. We will nuke ourselves back to the Stone Age, and we're not going to climb out. So yeah, scarring. There's the imagery. Some of the imagery in this film truly indelible. A couple in particular. One of the moments when one of the bomb drops, and just some really great use of sound design. Whether it's knowing when to hollow out the sound design, and the way they play with the grading. Or if it's just the constant kind of howling. This is this kind of constant howling wind. Or just some of the, little set pieces they pull off. There's one bit where this woman's holding her kind of radioactively fried baby. And it's just like truly harrowing. I don't know what else to say about this. Just like realism in itself as something to just chase endlessly is quite boring, I think. But like, it doesn't mean that realism can't be really fantastic and really interesting. And extremely powerful filmmaking, especially for a film like this. And I don't think I've seen a film where I've been more impressed by the degree of realism and what it's trying to portray. Again, you talk about my criterion and what is this film trying to be and how does it execute. It gets a full 11 on 10 for execution. It absolutely could not have done a better job, I think, with its material than it did. The only thing you might say is maybe that the narrator bits maybe bit distracting. You could say the same about the typewriter documentary elements, because then it's like, well, we've been nuked to the Stone Age, so who's making this documentary? Like, okay, you could ask stupid questions like that, but I don't think it affects the power, or I don't think it takes away from the effectiveness of the film in terms of what it's trying to be. I mean, look, yeah, I saw some Letterboxd review, and it's kind of like mindset that boggles my mind. It's like there are a couple of reviews that were like 1 star or 2 stars that will start by saying, yeah, this film does an incredible job. Like, I'm paraphrasing, but they'll be like, oh, this film's like incredible at what it's trying to do. I didn't enjoy any of it. 2 stars. It's like, I don't just, you just said it's achieved what it's trying to achieve. I get that you didn't have fun, but like, I don't know. It's a very weird mentality. I don't think I had fun watching this film, but like, I'm not stupid. Anyway, I gave this one a 9 out of 10. I would consider this essential. I'm going to add it to my essentials list. Because I think it's an essential film that everyone should see at least once, and no one wants to see more than once. Again, very much in that come and see kind of category of film. I kind of want to seek more of these films out for some bizarre, maybe alarming reason. Number 3. So I watched Psycho a couple of weeks ago, which is kind of a cheat. But listen, Spooktober. It's difficult to actually watch a film every day of October. But I would do it. Last year I got 27. But I'm going to the Leiden Film Festival, and that will be 5 days where I will not be watching horror films because I'll be watching a lot of other films. Although the last film I'm watching is a horror film, so that won't count. But yours won't. So I needed a few extra days to cheat, because I also don't want to just stay double watching films just for the sake of it. It kind of takes away from them. So long story short, I watched this like 10 days before Spooktober, but it counts. Sue me. So Psycho, one from this of fame. I've never seen it, unbelievably, and I've also never. It was my first Hitchcock film as well. I haven't rated it, and I don't know what to rate it. And honestly, I probably need to watch it again, or at least the last half an hour, because basically Eri got sleepy, and because she got sleepy, I got sleepy. So it's her fault. basically. My thoughts on it: the censorship Hays Code era of Hollywood, weird. It's in black and white, even though Hitchcock was already making films in color by then. I didn't bother to look into why. I probably should have, but I haven't. But I figure it has to do with blood, and we both commented on the famous shower scene, how like, wow, that isn't actually that much blood, and just weird era of filmmaking. So I don't have an awful lot to say about this. I 100% appreciate and get why it's a classic. I think Hitchcock, from this one film I've seen of his, again, disgraceful, I know. I say it as if anyone here cares. I say it as if anyone's here. But I could tell just from the saying, this guy's are brilliant at like pointing the camera somewhere, moving the camera, staging, blocking, direction, how to create suspense with your shots, how to like sequence shots together, like the obvious kind of mastery on display there. I just struggle with films from a certain period of time and like to watch them in a way that isn't purely academic. And I know a lot of people will agree with that, and I know a lot of people will greatly take offense to that. But I have been trying to watch more of those like classics that I haven't, and I've seen, these are, Psycho is 1960. That's not even that old. Like, but Metropolis, Frankenstein, whatever. And again, it always ends up feeling I can appreciate, but again, I'm watching it like I'm studying film, like I'm reading a book about the history of film, and I'm there to kind of like academically be interested and pick it apart, and that's so interesting how that contributes to later thought. It's kind of like, you don't read bloody Plato or even Descartes, I sound American, Descartes. You don't read Plato or, I guess some people still read Aristotle like that for some reason, but whatever. You don't read Plato or Descartes hoping to find, quote unquote, your life's philosophy. It's more about like intellectual history, understanding how ideas develop through time and the intrigue of that, right? But like, you're not going to read Plato when there's Kant. You're not going to read Kant when there's X. It's that kind of thing where you're reading to have an understanding of the history. I know I'm likening this to academia a lot, but that's because that's how it feels. And that feeling kind of goes away. Like for anything I watch from like 1970 onwards, I don't feel it. Up until 1970, it depends. I think pre-50s is difficult. I think 50s and 60s, again, it depends. Like I've seen The Seventh Seal and I only had a bit of that feeling. That's 1957. Persona by Bergman is one of my favorite movies ever, and I have no problem engaging with it properly and emotionally and fully like a contemporary film. Through a Glass Darkly, the same. Basically, Bergman is a better filmmaker than these guys, I guess, is what I'm unintentionally saying. But no, it's not what I'm saying. It's just that there's a kind of, I guess, generational film language gap, which again might not be, I might watch like Vertigo or Rear Window and not get that feeling, and those films are older than Psycho. I'm pretty sure they're older than Psycho, or at least they're, it's Hitchcock, because they're around the same time. Psycho is not one of those films. I guess the fact that it's horror makes it more difficult, because horror, I think, is also already films, have that kind of, I guess you call it generational film language gap issue. And I think horror films, it's even more apparent, because what was scary in a certain year is not scary now. Last year I went to watch The Exorcist. It was like the 50 year anniversary. We saw it in the cinema. I thought it was a fantastic movie, which I really like, and I'd quite like to watch again. And maybe I'll do a 10-minute video rambling about good and evil in The Exorcist for millions of listeners at home. But I can't say I was like scared the way like Hereditary would scare me. But I know that like at the time it was proper, like people were proper terrified. If you ask if your parents watched it, I know Harry's mom watched it and was terrified. And so if you could ask your parents if they watched it when it came out, and people watched at the time it came out, like that was terrifying. And now like I don't think most of my age peers, like, even pretentious film people, like, oh no, it's so... Look, I mean, it's scary in a way. It's chilling, and it says something frightening about the world. But, like, I'm not scared the way they were scared, and the way Hereditary would scare me, or the way Pulse scared me, or the way The Ring, or not Ring, Ringu, which is the original. I haven't actually seen the American version of The Ring. Anyway, it doesn't scare me the way those do. And, like, for people who watched it when it came out, it does. And so that's what I'm saying. I think that language... that film language generational gap, I'm sure there's a better academic term for it, but that's what I'm going to call it. it's all the more apparent, I think, with horror films. So look, Psycho did not. It also, to be fair though, it doesn't help that like everyone, it's why, there's a list of films like Psycho, The Sixth Sense, I know, Luke, I Am Your Father from The Empire Strikes Back. Those films where like, whether you've seen it or not, you know what happens. Like I haven't seen The Sixth Sense and I know the whole I see dead people thing. And Psycho's one of those. I think everyone knows about the shower scene. I don't know, probably some of you don't. I don't know, some people don't, but a lot of people would know about that. And I already knew about that. I already know. Basically, it's a film built around, suspense and surprise and like, his mother's, he thinks he's cosplaying as his mother, and then there's his mother's dead body, and then there's this, and like, if you know all the twists and turns already, then to be fair, that does take away from the effective of a film like that a lot, so it's quite unfair. I guess my main takeaway when I watch this film is I totally respect it, rate it. I get why it has the reputation it does. I get why it's so foundational, and I think it's very, very, very well made, and it just did not affect me at all. I think the lead performance from Anthony Perkins as Norman Bates, I think he's really great. I think there's like little touches of like where he just sort of like punctuates his sentences wrong, or the pace of what he's saying is just a bit off, or he smiles a second later than he should. Like, it's little things like that that really sell the character. I thought the vintage bra that you get to see is very funny. Vintage bras are funny. Very erudite comment there. Again, I appreciate a lot of the filmmaking and the technique on display, and that one scene on the staircase, which might seem goofy to people now and even to me, but I appreciate, they were doing things with cameras and lenses and film and editing that were like novel and exciting and catch people off guard, and again are so significant and important to how, the rest of films have developed for the next 60 years, and how indebted film in general and the horror genre specifically is to this film and Hitchcock. But also the cars are cool because it's a film from 1960, so cars look sick. But what can I tell you? I just can't engage on any kind of emotional level with a film like this. I engaged emotionally a lot with a film like Threads, and lots of films from the 70s, plenty from the 60s, but some just feel, I guess the word is dated. And that's not, again, that doesn't really say anything about the quality of the film per se, just my ability to engage with it. So yeah, kind of a disappointing review on Psycho. I think I was going to do a whole week, but I'm seeing how long I've rambled for. I think that's plenty for episode 1. For whoever has listened to this at all, thank you. For whoever listened to it all the way through. When did you zone out? Leave a comment telling me more or less if you can guess the minute, however long this is. I'm seeing like 1 hour on my recording thing, but I'm probably gonna have to edit it to like 40 minutes for like bits where I'm like breathing or not talking or quickly skinning a Wikipedia thing to see who did what in this film. So yeah, let me know what minute you checked out mentally. Let me know what you were doing on the side. Leave a link to the TikToks you were watching. Tell me if you really like what you've watched lately, what you want to watch, any horror films you're interested in. Tell me if there's something you'd like me to watch and talk about. Leave a comment for algorithmic purposes. I don't know. Thanks for listening. I would like to say, next week we'll talk about these films, but I'm not 100% sure what order I'm watching any of these films in. I will definitely be watching Bram Stoker's Dracula by Francis Ford Coppola sometime this week. In terms of other films I'm watching this month, again, there's a pool of about 50 I'm picking from, so we'll see. I'll definitely be watching another Kiyoshi Kurosawa. He did Pulse. I'll probably be watching Cure by him, and maybe another one if I really feel like. I'll be watching Evil Dead 2. Definitely going to watch at least 1 or 2 found horror films. Blair Witch Project, Paranormal Activity, ones I haven't got to yet. I haven't seen Rosemary's Baby. I've got that downloaded, so I will be watching that. Night of the Living Dead by George A. Romero, in some ways the original zombie movie. I'll be watching 1 or 2 films like Insidious, some jump scare crap, so I actually feel some physical terror. Definitely need to throw something animated in there. Belladonna of Sadness is What I've Got, although it's from 1973, and Eric seems to have some kind of weird beef with old style animation in some regard. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. Classics. I want to watch Carrie because I've never seen the original Carrie. Audition by Takashi Miike. Panda Sven, another British 4TV movie by another British social realism expert, Alan Clark. They love English filmmakers, especially of that like 70s, 80s era. They love some social realism. They love some bleak skies and strife between working class men and their wives. They seem very into that kind of theme. Sure, there's nothing to read into there. Nightmare on Elm Street, and I would definitely be watching Heretic. I'm going to watch that at the Leiden Film Festival, where Hugh Grant apparently kind of rambles about philosophy and Radiohead while being weird and creepy to people. So that's exciting. Oh, and I've never seen Saw or any of the Saw movies, so I think might fit in the first Saw movie. And I have to watch a Disney Channel original movie. Halloween Town is up on the docket. Last year I watched Hocus Pocus, and I may put out one talking about last year's films as well, or not. We'll see. Bye.